So this was supposed to be the intro to a sculpting video, but it ended up so long I decided it was better to discuss it separately. Anyways, this started when I did this drawing. I didn't film this one at the time, it was just a study. This was done using the new Skull Sketcher 2.0 app by Anatomy 360. It's free with a social media share, and it's improved a lot since the first version, which was mostly unusable. I might do a separate review on it because the new features are really quite nice. Anyways, it comes with 2 skull scans. This is the male one, and then here I'm starting to draw the female one. I started to record this one as a test because I'm trying out a new recording setup. And after I did this one, I thought I might as well continue with the studies, and I got the idea to do a skull sculpt, by which I mean that I'd been trying to think of something of medium complexity to sculpt, because I wanted to do another 3D scanning video testing the best way to photograph something, and I wanted to be able to distribute the photos because I had a lot of people ask me for the photos of the other sculpt, but since that was a personal character of mine, I didn't want to give those away. There are sample photos available on the internet, but very few are entire 360 sets meant for the scanning of an object. Also, I thought I'd paint the sculpt this time to test capturing the textures. I also wanted to do a skull for myself because I remember better when I sculpt things, but before doing the sculpt I had to have some sense of what I was doing, so that's why I did all these studies. Basically, with the studies fresh in my head, I could do the sculpt, which would then help cement that information. Now, initially, as you see here, it started mostly with just me copying what I saw, trying to get accustomed to the subject matter, if that makes sense. Kind of cataloging what areas I found hard. Not in the sense of drawing it, but how much I understood what was happening in the 3D space. And I've mentioned this a lot, but it's very, very different in my opinion, copying something visually and truly understanding its structure. Some of these hard areas for me, for example, were the eye sockets and the area of the temple that sort of dips in around it. Also the nose and its angle and size relative to the face, and also that area where the cheekbone merges with the teeth area. Now, the bottom of the skull is also quite complex, but I only studied it briefly because there isn't much I need as an artist to understand about it except its main shape, at least that I know of. For other areas, I tried to pay a bit more attention to the surface details because I want to eventually learn how all the muscles attach. I feel like I've gotten to the point where I can draw an okay face from memory. I only sometimes have a bit of trouble with the proportions of the nose to the mouth, but what I feel really lacking in is my ability to shade and add detail. I know where the details go, but sometimes I don't know why they're there, and I feel that has to do a lot with not really knowing the muscles of the face, because I have this same problem with other areas of the body. But I also felt it would just lead to bad habits, not properly understanding the skull beneath those muscles. And I can tell I was right in that feeling now because I almost feel like I've gained a sort of X-ray vision. I can tell a lot now when looking at someone where the skull is. I can almost picture it beneath the skin, and I'm sure learning the muscles will help develop that further. Anyways, at this point with these smaller skulls, I had the main structure pretty much in my head, but I wanted to understand how much the skulls could vary. I remember I did the Loomis skull exercise once, and I felt the way he exaggerated the skulls was a bit unrealistic, but doing this I realized there's a lot more variation than I anticipated, though it's very subtle, much more subtle than Loomis's examples. But I can understand why he might have exaggerated it for the purposes of an exercise. And this was using references that probably had some skulls that were out of the norm, because I googled for pictures of multiple skulls like in ossuaries, but also museum skull collections and stuff like that. And although they were all Homo sapien skulls, some of them seemed out of the norm, and I can tell a few of them were children's skulls by their shape and size. So I probably got an above average level of variation. Now I initially started with the easy skulls that had no jaws, then moved on to the ones with jaws, just to start with something easy first because not all the skulls were facing the same direction. I drew them all in a 3/4 view on purpose so that I would really have to think about the structure by being forced to translate what I saw to a different rotation. I've done this before and it can give you a really good idea of any problem areas once you've got the main structure down and you think you've got it down. In this case, I focused a lot on the cheekbones and the area above the eye socket. I also tried to add a sense of direction to some of the surfaces, like around the jaw. I can understand what I drew, but that was kind of a fail because it just made them look old. But that just tells me that's another thing to work on. I also have this problem when trying to add a sense of direction to muscles. I draw too many lines or don't know quite where to add them, and they end up kind of scratchy and weird. But at least looking at my reference, I can sense the perspective better the more I practice, so I know at some point I'll get there. It's all really a matter of perspective in the end. Anyways, I do want to touch on the medium a bit for a moment. I've been switching mediums throughout these studies. The first one was in pencil, the second in carbon pencil, and this one is in charcoal. I've never really liked charcoal or carbon, even though I like to use the darkest graphite available. But I've been trying to give them a chance again lately, mostly for recording reasons because they don't shine. I still like graphite better, but one thing I noticed while doing these small skull studies was that since the charcoal made it hard to detail, I focused a lot less on the details. I already knew that using larger brushes does that to you when painting, but it's something to keep in mind when drawing as well. Also, it's best if the tool makes it impossible to do sharp details. Like the carbon, you could still get sharp details with it. It just, the point went away really fast. But with the charcoal, it's just almost impossible to sharpen it to a point. Getting a tool like that, like a pen, like with a pen, you want a pen because that makes it impossible to erase. So kind of the same thing with the charcoal pencil. At least for me, that takes my mind off detailing pretty fast because it would just mean getting frustrated with the pencil sharpener. Now, by this final study, I had finished building my new computer so I can finally record without problems. And I'm using Krita here with a custom brush I made. Except for the things that require editing, I've switched mostly to Krita for drawing and painting, especially now that it can handle large canvases well. Its brush engine, or rather engines, although a bit confusing, have way more options than Photoshop's. And you can do things like this pencil brush I made where just the tilt is set to size, something Photoshop can't do for some reason. And this brush can do detail, but only with the pen really straight, and since you tend to draw at an angle, it doesn't really encourage detailing. Anyways, here I'm paying specific attention to the variety of shapes I'm seeing. I started out with the eye sockets because I feel that's the most prominent difference between skulls. I wanted to know if there were universal features of the eye sockets, but all I found really was the distances near the nose, and also most eyes, but not all, tend to be at a slight tilt. Oh, and also the socket bends inward near the sides, as I'm showing here. Then after that, I moved on to do a side view to analyze the differences in the angles and proportions, because the 3/4 view already made me pretty familiar with the front, but not so much the side and the back of the skull. You'll see now and then I'll draw some lines off to the side, and those are just kind of shorthand notes on the extremes I see near those areas. It's a way of saying this part varies between what I drew and these notes. And as I drew these, sometimes there wasn't enough space, like with the cheekbones. I had to place them farther away. I hope it's clear what they are. I later reposition them after I'm done drawing, but while I'm drawing digitally, I like not having to worry about that. I only move them around if I needed the space to draw there. Now, here I messed up the positioning of the jaw, but the nice thing about referencing multiple images is that you can spot mistakes like that really quickly. Also, it really helps to remember where something goes because you have to check it against so many images. It doesn't really allow you to blindly copy. And finally, here at the end, I'm just drawing a few variations I noticed that can't quickly be put into notes, such as how the eye socket meets the forehead, and also how flat and oval shaped the skull can be, and where should the proportions be measured from in those cases. At this point, I felt confident enough to start the sculpt, so this was the last study. So I hope you enjoyed the video. The sculpting video will be up probably next week. It's almost done. I just need to finish narrating it. So that's it. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Otherwise, if you found the video helpful, please consider subscribing or following me on any of my social media accounts where I'll post sketches and studies like these and works in progress.